Good afternoon. I'm Sharon Hill, Director of Arts and Education at the North Carolina Arts Council, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to another session of Teaching Artists Tuesday. We have a wonderful team with us today, and we're going to discuss what it is like to be entrepreneurial. In the meantime, you'll want to make sure that as the discussion goes along, if you have questions, you enter them in the chat box, and we will be picking them up and bringing them to our panelists towards the end of the discussion. In addition, you'll want to be sure to check these Teaching Artist Certificate Facebook page for great information if you want some training in being a teaching artist. And also, you can find connecting links on the North Carolina Arts Council Facebook page to all the sessions for Teaching Artists Tuesdays. So if you haven't been able to be with us for every one, you can catch up at that point. We're going to talk a bit about entrepreneurialism. And in July, we had Eric Booth as our keynote speaker. And he's been talking about entrepreneurialism for a long, long time. In 2017, he spoke of entrepreneurialism as a natural expansion of artistry, as the wish to take your artistic passion beyond your excellent skills into creating new opportunities to connect with audiences and to find new ways to contribute to life. Even before COVID, he spoke of engaging with audiences in new ways, adjusting the formats that you use, and devising new ways to activate audience participation. If you're a visual artist, that new ways to engage your viewers. He spoke of engaging with the community in new ways. So not our traditional way of just being a viewer, but other ways. How do we engage with our viewers? In this manner, you are also raising the profile of the arts in general. When he joined us in July, he again discussed the importance of entrepreneurialism and had a phrase that Lenora and I have just loved, which was be entrepreneurial or die. A little dramatic, but it gets to the point. In today's session of Teaching Artists Tuesdays, we're going to continue that discussion. And moderating the discussion today is Lenora Helm Hammonds, Director of the Vocal Jazz Program at NC Central University and Director of the Teaching Artist Certificate Program located there as well. Lenora, take it away.
Thank you, Sharon. This is so exciting because one of the things that's really interesting for me in being a teaching artist is, can you hear me well? Just wanted to make sure. Okay. And being a teaching artist is knowing how important your work is. And I think that this current condition of a global pandemic has shown us the value of arts and culture. One of the things that we're going to meet today, one of the things about today that I'm very excited about is you're about to meet some fantastic arts practitioners, teaching artists, and those who are advocates for other teaching artists. And we're going to learn just what they're doing to answer the charge or I guess the very exciting thing about Eric Booth's premise that you should be or die is that we are really seeing how it has saved or will save the teaching artists that are practicing now and people who are thinking about becoming teaching artists. So without further ado, I want you to meet our panelists. The first person I'd like to introduce you to is Janelle Logan. She is an independent curator and arts advocate dedicated to supporting the careers of contemporary artists. Originally from New York, Logan worked at several arts organizations, including the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Whitney Museum of Art, Studio Museum in Harlem. Moving south, she worked at the Gibbs Museum of Art in Charleston, South Carolina, and the Harvey B. Gantt Center for African American History and Culture in Charlotte, North Carolina. She recently served as the curator in residence at the McCowell Center for Arts and Innovation in Charlotte, North Carolina. In 2016, Jonell founded 300 Arts Project. Through this work, she has curated exhibitions at organizations across the Southeast, including the Mint Museum in North Carolina, the National Black Arts Festival, Georgia, and the Columbia Museum of Art, South Carolina. In addition to her curatorial work, Jonell is executive director of the League of Creative Interventionists, a San Francisco-based nonprofit supporting a national network of artists and community partners using creativity to transform communities from within. Welcome, Janelle Logan. Our next panelist, I know, I feel like I want to hear like, whoa, all of the applause. Jeremy Skidmore is the artistic director of Rhino Leap Productions based in Asheboro, North Carolina. In addition to helping to start Rhino Leap, he co-founded the Worldwide Art Collective in Taiwan, the Capital Talent Agency in DC, the H Street Playhouse in DC, and the Theater Alliance in DC, where his work was nominated for 34 Helen Hayes Awards. Jeremy has also directed, produced, or taught all over the United States, as well as in South America, Europe, Asia, and Africa. He has a BFA from the University of North Carolina School of the Arts and an MBA from American University. Let's welcome Jeremy Skidmore. Hey. Our next panelist is Marlon Torres. He's the executive director of North Carolina Arts in Action, an organization that uses dance, music, and performance to instill and develop life and academic skills such as self-esteem, perseverance, and excellence in children. Marlon began his career as a principal dancer in Mini Pops, a televised dance ensemble featuring child performers with a loyal following in Latin America. As former principal dancer of the international modern dance company Galumpa, Marlon created and performed award-winning choreography showcased around the world. He has performed dancing roles on stages throughout the Americas, Europe, and Asia, including the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., the Kravis Center in West Palm Beach, Florida, California's Napa Valley Opera House, Finland's Jyväskylä, I know I messed that up, Festival, the Art Television Network in Germany, and the Singapore Arts Festival. Marlon holds an MBA in marketing from the University of Leicester in the UK, a BA in theater and dance from Binghamton University, is a certified project management professional, and a certified association executive. Let's welcome Marlon Torres. And last but not least, we have the Easterling. I'm a little biased because she's a graduate of our NCCU Teaching Artist Certificate Program. She's a multidisciplinary visual artist, a native of Durham, North Carolina, and a graduate of North Carolina Central University with a BA in art. She's worked with several different after-school enrichment programs in her community, aiding them in the arts. She now works as a teaching artist at Champion Education in Morrisville, North Carolina, and informed us today that her wonderful downtown Durham mural that was part of this wonderful series during COVID is now in the permanent collection of the North Carolina Museum of African Art. Did I say that correctly? Well, Megan can correct us soon, I hope.
History.
History. Thank you. I'm just so excited about today. So let's welcome Megan. Awesome. So I am going to turn now so that the panelists can all address our first question. Eric Booth's charge to teaching artists worldwide was to be entrepreneurial or die. How has COVID brought to bear his advice in your work as a teaching artist or in supporting teaching artists? Any one of you can jump right in.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'll leave room for someone who would like to start first. If not, I will, but maybe Janelle was ready.
Sure, why not? Thank you for that open invitation to begin. So I think that there are a couple of things that raises for me, both in supporting artists through a program that offers dollars in support as a form of a fellowship, and thinking about teaching with kind of fine art grad students. The one I would actually argue that not only teaching artists, but all artists really have to be entrepreneurial. And I think that's historically, it's not just in the moment of COVID. I think COVID kind of raised the stakes for a lot of people. But that practice of thinking of your work, especially regardless of discipline, if you are looking at your craft as your profession, the idea of thinking about and approaching your work, not only creatively, but as a business is critical. And so that's one of the spaces. I mean, I went through art school. I have an MFA. I understand that process of how we're taught. And oftentimes we focus so much on what is your voice? How are you being creative? And neglect to talk about, are you thinking strategically about who you're engaging with? You know, how are you approaching galleries and institutions? And what is the long-term goal professionally in terms of like doing this as a job, but not in the way that we associate job, right, with challenging language. So I think this idea is critical, and being an entrepreneur and having that sense is critical. COVID just really kind of highlighted that for us. And so there are so many creatives who are in the moment unsure what to do. They're looking at, how do I reach audiences in a way that I have not before, right? Because that act of reaching out is a challenge, because they're not used to that practice. Thinking about, like revenue and budget is something that is we're forced to think about now in a way that people were not before. And so I just think that this idea of being an entrepreneur, thinking creatively, thinking about how you can connect and collaborate with other people who might be slightly outside of your genre or the way that you make work, are all things that we're being forced to think about. But historically, and I think and after COVID, should be thinking about and integrating into practice.
Thank you, Janelle.
I just know for me, one of the opportunities that COVID has forced upon us, since we have had to switch to virtual platforms, is that it's created larger opportunities to work with people all over the country. So most of the artists I work with are in North Carolina, of course, but because of the online platform, it's allowed me to tap into, okay, this is the best person I actually can possibly think of anywhere in the United States to teach this subject or to speak to this topic. And recognizing that I'm often not that person. And so the one benefit for me about the online COVID force platform is that wider net.
I will take a stab at answering the question in terms of how COVID has come to bear on our organization or in me and supporting teaching artists and being a teaching artist myself. It's the difference between the teaching artists that are employed versus the teaching artists that are freelance or more hourly. So I see great differences there. And in my work, what we did with the board of directors when as an organization was really immediately make a commitment to employment to teaching artists. So that was some concrete action that we could do to support that. And then be entrepreneurial in the sense of how we were going to now promote our messaging or what we were doing, and therefore finding those new ways to engage those teaching artists in a new way, because now they're day to day was not looking the same. They were not going to schools. They're not traveling places. They're teaching like Jeremy said, online and such. We've moved on this platform. So that really was, to me, the most difficult thing to deal with and to see bear right on us. The difference is that because to that point, I couldn't, right? We were holding on to employment, but the hourly is what I'm trying to say. Hourly teaching artists were the ones that really suffered throughout this. We couldn't make that commitment to hold on to those, but we made a commitment to say, let's keep the ones that we have employed, and we did, and we continue to do. And then luckily, we received this relief funding that's coming out there, which I'm sure we'll talk about later in terms of other resources, but that was the biggest difference that it bore.
Yes. Thank you for that, Marlon. And responded where they had to make those very difficult choices. We have the ones who are employed with us, and then the ones who are hourly employees, and everyone is getting a new look at the way that they have to think about their work and sustaining their incomes as teaching artists and those who support teaching artists. Megan?
I was just gonna say, so I'm a visual artist and I mostly work with elementary students. And since we had to switch over virtually, I was thinking that I really had to develop an entrepreneurial mindset and thinking about like researching ways to what works best with my students and me, like just different ways to keep them engaged. And for me, that's been incorporating more games and like open discussions. So I think that is like how that works for me.
Excellent. And when you're rethinking the way you deliver what you do, there's ever the opportunity to say, oh, okay, well, can I make this an entrepreneurial track, a different way that I deliver my services? How do I use this as a product going forward? Excellent. Before we move from this question, Karen is helping us with the polls. She's attending the polls that are happening, and it looks like some people have made some responses to the same question for our attendees who are listening and watching live on Facebook. Karen, can we see the results of that poll?
It was up a minute ago, and what I found remarkable was that the responses were evenly distributed between the choices. So it sounds to me like our audience is in a little bit of all over the place in terms of their comfort with entrepreneurialism.
Yes. Yes. Well, that's good to know that we've hit a pulse where we have people who are in the same boat. Although, what's the saying? We're in the same storm, but not in the same boat. But it's interesting to see that there are a lot of people in those different buckets. Okay, so let's move to our next question. Okay, panelists, here you go. What are some of the distinctions artists should understand between being entrepreneurial in your pursuit of engaging work or clients? What are some of the distinctions artists should understand between being entrepreneurial in pursuit of engaging work or clients and selling your work?
I took a class in grad school on social entrepreneurship. So it wasn't arts related at all, but it was about impact versus economic pursuit. And so I think about that a lot. So I think one of the things I just wanted to chat for a little bit about is this distinction in entrepreneurship between I've got an idea that I'm trying to use to make money and to scale up and replicate versus having an entrepreneurial idea that's really at its core driven by social impact, which isn't necessarily tied to money at all, but tied to change. Does anybody have any thoughts on that? Since we're using the word entrepreneurship a lot.
Important distinction.
Well, let's see. I think that when you're talking about nonprofits, right, or in the typical, let's just say in the typical environment, which is teaching artists are, do their work. If it's like a nonprofit, then setting, then they may be thinking, there's a mission to this, and yes, the impact. How many children am I teaching a year? Is it 1,000? Well, that's worth to me more, that impact, than what I may be making on salary or so. I think that's how I'm interpreting you, Jeremy, at this moment, with impact versus the economic pursuits, or and how they may be not in tandem with each other. um, and then I think, of course, of the those those independent teaching artists that have been able to have great careers, and and they've always have to have an entrepreneurial setup where let me forgive me, let me just go back to the question, Lenora, just one moment. Sort of looking at the distinctions between being entrepreneurial, right, and the pursuit of engaging your clients versus sort of like selling your work. The reason why I may struggle with this question is because I really see them as working together to be able to sustain any career, um, whether that's a teaching artist or just like we talked earlier, just an artist that has never really used the vehicle of his or her art to teach in, say, in a classroom setting. So it's hard for me to separate the two. And in terms of engaging work, I think that's where you need to be even further entrepreneurial, because you have to think of ways that you'll continue to have touch points with those clients, with the people that help sustain, that that environment around your art to survive, the people who buy it, that sell it, that talk about it. So selling and engaging, if you can't have, you can sell something, and then if you don't have a plan to continue to bring those people back to what you've been selling all along, then it's a lot of work, right? It takes more energy to gain a new buyer or a new client, than to maintain one long term. So that's where I think entrepreneurial really comes in, and the planning on how will one continue as a teaching artist have relevance long term, um, through these engagements.
Mhm. So one of the things that may help this in terms of clarity is I, as a musician, there is I'll borrow some sales terms. There's the sell in and the sell through. So I need to have the club owner, the venue presenter be interested in my work, and that's a different conversation, a set of marketing tools than it is to an audience member who buys my CD. And so for some teaching artists, maybe they've only been thinking of working in school settings. Well, when schools were migrating to online, there were teaching artists who felt, inadequately prepared to do that kind of work online. And so where else, if you had an entrepreneurial mindset, where else were you able to deliver your goods? And so it's thinking, if you think of in terms of the question of being entrepreneurial and engaging work, if I engage a buyer who will allow me to then be sold through to an audience, um, then that's a two different mindsets of selling my work. The buyer allows me to come in and do my work in one setting, but then I have to have a different conversation and set of tools to market to directly to the consumer. So that's one of the ways. But those are good points. Jeremy, you gave us something that we have to chew on for a bit. Janelle or Megan, you want to jump in?
I was just gonna say, I thought the distinction came into marketing yourself versus just marketing like your product. like there's a certain component in selling yourself as part of the product, not just the tangible material that people can buy. Because I feel like ultimately people are going to invest more into like you as an individual to like sell your ideas. That's how I thought of the question.
Mhm. Yes.
So I think it's a really multi-layered and complicated question. Because I think when we talk about this idea of engagement, and in some ways, I've been kind of thinking about Jeremy's question about like that social practice space or that social space versus, a contrasting kind of commercial maybe space. That and thinking also about the current art world, specifically coming from a fine arts perspective. So when we're talking a lot about artists being kind of socially engaged or creating platforms to people, for people and their viewers to have an experience that questions kind of the framework of things that are happening, that idea of engagement is critically important. But at the same time, it's a challenge to kind of market that work, right? I think there are similar skill sets that we develop as artists to engage people, right? Because that level of engagement is really about finding value in the work, finding yourself and place in the work. Also, I think finding allies to show the work so that that message can be out in the world and communicated. But there's that step after that I think is often challenging for artists, which is why we often historically have depended on galleries to sell work, right? Or curators to validate the work that's being done and therefore to have an effect on the market that allows your work to really become, hot and purchased. I think that the invention of the internet, right, and social media, to the point where prior to COVID, artists really were building a platform to talk about their work and to make it available, was critical. And I think in a lot of ways, thankfully, shifted our practice before COVID hit, because it at least allowed for artists to kind of think independently and entrepreneurially, right? About how do I want my work to be seen? How do I move away from these systems that often regulate how our work is shown and ultimately sold? But I still think that it's a huge challenge for people to kind of to think about that. Not everyone is selling artwork on Instagram, right? Because it's not easy and you have to build up the following, and all of those steps to make that happen can be difficult. But we're in a moment where I think the structures that have historically kind of worked or been kind of created to affect the market are changing. But it's still a lot of work. And I think artists are in this moment thinking not only about that, but how am I able to stay true to what I'm trying to create, but have other platforms? So I know of artists who are textile-based artists who are really asking kind of social questions, who are supported very heavily by museums because it was a platform for social conversation, but slightly challenged by galleries. And they actually started collaborating with nonprofits that are trying to use who are making masks, for example, for sale. It stays, but still they have a socially conscious kind of lean. And so I think there's really is this like creative network of people that are happening to try to make sure that the work is out there, that they're staying true to mission and vision, but then also having the flexibility to still make the work that they want to make and make the statements that are important.
Those are all good points. I think
I was going to say, Lenora, is it kind of like going back to the reason that we make art in the first place, and then somehow melding that with how this current atmosphere allows us to present it? It's what I seem to be hearing from everybody.
yes, exactly. Because a lot of artists before this happened, even though some were positioned, as Janelle was saying, to kind of do this migration, they now don't have the burden of trying a proof of concept of in online platforms. So we were able to see what the Italian, when you saw Italians on balconies serenading each other, uh, we saw how people moved to the arts and culture to narrate their lives, to give them hope, to give them ideas of how to feel their social and emotional places of being. And so now I think the arts have a really, and there's an amazing opening now for us to, we don't have to validate what we do and to prove that we're worthy and needed and necessary, but we do have different vehicles to allow our work to be seen. It's just now we have to give up whatever things we're holding on to. This is, oh, I don't want to be online, or oh, I don't know how to do that. Um, this is a huge paradigm shift in our field. Are attending and listening, and we have a couple of different audiences. They're on Facebook Live on the Teaching Artist Certificate page, and I started a watch party on my page. So together on Facebook, we have a good amount of audience and some questions that have come up there. If you're listening, please put your questions in the Q&A so we can get to them later. And Karen, maybe we can see the poll now from this same question to our attendees.
Yes, the poll is up.
Oh, good.
Please be sure to participate. It gives us a great way to feel the pulse of the group.
Okay, and we're waiting for answers. Beautiful. I see the answers munching away. What are some of the distinctions artists should understand between being entrepreneurial? If you're on Facebook, you can answer. What are some of the distinctions artists should understand between being entrepreneurial in your pursuit of engaging work or clients and selling your work? Yes.
So there is a question in the chat box, and I think our moderator Lenora will let us know, or
Yes.
at some point very good.
What I'd like to do, well, let's see, our poll answers up yet? Yes, just about.
Poll just ended.
Okay. Yes. Let's see, 25% of folks said that they, okay, we should be able to see them now. Can they see the responses? As host, I can't. Okay.
There they are.
Okay. Give us those.
Sure, 25% answered A, and I can't see the question, but I can tell you 25% answered A, 19% answered B, 16% answered C, and 3% answered D.
Okay.
Yeah, we're spread pretty nicely again.
Mm-hmm. The questions here. I have many entrepreneurial projects. I constantly struggle. He said that. I have taken some steps to be more entrepreneurial. Yes, 19% of folks said that. That's good. I want to be entrepreneurial, but don't know how to get started. Okay, that's the other half of folks. I am uncertain of what it means to be entrepreneurial in my arts discipline. Now that's interesting. We should talk about that. I think being entrepreneurial clashes with my values as an artist. No one said that. So that's excellent that no one thought that it was unnecessary. Maybe, and we have a little time. Maybe we could crunch that one. I'm uncertain of what it means to be entrepreneurial in my arts discipline before we move to question 3. and then the attendees' questions we'll get to, as Marlon suggested. Don't forget. What is being entrepreneurial? What aspects are the same across arts disciplines? Panelists.
There's a very famous entrepreneurial story about an engineer who designed water pumps in towns in Africa that were attached to merry-go-rounds, so that the more the kids played on the merry-go-rounds, the more water was pumped from the well. And then he sold the face of the merry-go-rounds to corporate sponsors. So each merry-go-round had a different corporate logo. And I think about that story a lot because to me, the elegance is so profound in terms of functionality and play. And so for me, that's kind of a cornerstone when I think about ideas and entrepreneurship, is trying to find that balance between some needed that feels fundamental, but that is also playful and artistic. And I find the most successful ideas tap into both of those things. I have never done anything as elegant as the pump and the pump, but that's the framework I use a lot.
That's an amazing framework there. Wow. Anyone else?
And I think it also frees me from getting bogged down in thinking about, like, entrepreneurship is more than just marketing and more than just grant writing. For me, it's so much more about struggling with the ideas.
Right.
And that's free.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
Lenora, that kind of leads really beautifully into the question that we did get from the attendees, and that was, talking about that need to be creative and make your art, and how you balance that with your time that you need to spend to learn and implement how to use social media and the business side of being an artist.
Yeah. I mean, I teach my students, and I've learned from mentors that you really have to spend about 50% of your time on your craft and 50% of your time on your business. And it's not like Jeremy just said, it's not just about getting dollars in your hand from your work. It's relationships. You need time to ideate. You need time for ideation. Mondays are my time to do that. Early morning. What am I thinking about my art, and to inform kind of the times I have carved out to work on it during the week. But then there's the time to do that paperwork, or make those calls, make those return calls and emails. The worst thing for me as someone who hires artists is to wait for weeks and weeks for a return email or have to chase someone. So those communication skills are important. To juggle. I don't think time management is a real thing. I think that there's time functionality. How can this time function today for me for the tasks that I have as my priorities? Anyone else on the panel want to talk about juggling art making versus time spent learning and implementing social media and doing the business parts, or any parts of those questions?
I mean, I'm a big proponent of, you do not have to be an expert in all things. That is not what we do. And that's a lot of pressure to put on oneself. I see a lot of artists who are working collaboratively. So there are people that I know that are incredible on Excel. I am not. But they are at all. But they are so willing to kind of to coach or to help the process, like to help you get a foot in it so that you can be functional and aspire to be great. And I see that a lot on like social media and other spaces where artists are really kind of thinking about, when we talk about relationships and networking, we often think about like reaching up. And I think Issa Rae talked about like that whole idea of kind of horizontal networking. Like you connect with the people that are around you, you support each other in the skills that you have so that you are all kind of rising effectively. And I really see that happening in the moment. And I think that's the model that allows us to get the most done, and to also not feel isolated, because this is an incredibly isolating moment. A lot of folks are still staying home, or like their workspaces aren't necessarily safe. And so this ability to create, I think, community in a different way that is meaningful and supportive is important.
Yes.
I would like to add something in response to how to balance or juggle, your art making versus what you have to do to keep it going, the business side. I'll share it. I'll share this information through my experience as an artist. I remember very much being in a rehearsal studio and working. This is pre-COVID times, working to get ready to making art, and knowing that I wasn't getting paid for that time. That was my mindset. Oh, I'm not getting paid for this time, but I knew that we would then go out and do a booking of shows, and that was the pay. So to earlier points, one is always going to be juggling and balancing things. My advice that I gave to myself was that in order to balance my business part of making art well, I needed to at least learn about some basic business concepts. So I really worked toward complementing my artistic abilities and training with technical business training, just so that I would know of how to speak the language and communicate to that particular stakeholder or audience, right? Segment of the audience, your CEOs that you're going to go to ask to please fund your mission, because it's beautiful and it touches many lives. But you can talk numbers and say, look, your investment in us will help us reach X number of children, a whole school. And so again, complementing your artistry with, like you said, social media and such. Last point on how to do it, perhaps think about, to also earlier points, one can't do everything oneself. So have you experimented with actually outsourcing certain things to help your career? Like, for example, hey, that there's I know that social media is important. So would you dare, as a teaching artist, doing it solo, freelance, outsource that project of getting someone to help you, right? Retaining someone to help you deal with your social media account, so at least you have a cohesive professional artist look. People who are serious, they make those sorts of investments and commitments.
I'm hearing some of our newer or younger artists saying, I don't have the money to outsource things. But keep in mind, I think for many of us, when we first started, we would trade. You would trade your artwork to another person. Bartering is a wonderful thing in the arts community. So it doesn't always rely on money.
Right. And there's so many different ways now to barter. Even on Fiverr, websites like Fiverr, Fiverr.com, where I go sometimes to have artists or people who work independently to make a couple of extra bucks, and they're good at writing, and they'll maybe write some copy for me for anything, and they will kind of buy for that particular job. There are many different ways too in your community, and create a networking pod, accountability pod, getting people who are better at some things than others. You do have to be creative and not stand still, but it's like the possibility thing between your ears about who you are. What do you say about what it is, and how committed are you to getting it done? Not to say that if you don't do that, it's just we really do have to reach out. No man is an island. No man or woman is an island. So any other panelists have a comment about that before we move to our third question? Okay. Oh, Marlon?
Oh, I just have a quick question. So I'm saying, the E choice, entrepreneurial pursuit moved me away from the focus on my craft. Can't I hire someone?
That was part of the polling question.
Yes, and very good. That was actually, I just thought it was relevant to this idea of, can't I hire someone, and your resources and limited resources to do so, but to the point of, the concept of barter, and and true about that building community, and Jonell talks about it to the collaboration. It's just an important piece. I want to thank you, Sharon, for helping me clarify that, that there is other ways, and of having that mentality of the possibility mentality. Appreciate it.
I think we talked earlier, and I'm not going to quote, well, yeah, I will quote you, Marlon. Marlon said dancers are really good at following numbered steps, but if you ask them to walk across by themselves, they will stumble and fall. And it's a great analogy that, there's nothing wrong with not being great at everything. The strength is in knowing, who you can reach out to, how you can make partnerships. And even as a grant reader, I can tell you that I respect greatly artists that say, I can do this great, and I'm using a partnership to do this part better. So don't be afraid of that. You don't have to be the be all and end all of the artist community.
For sure. And I mean, look at this series here of Teaching Artists Tuesdays. It's a partnership between North Carolina Arts Council and NCCU Teaching Artist Certificate Program. We've come together to see what we could find out about you and about our field in this state. And we've been able to grow in leaps and bounds and learn a lot. So I'm really grateful for everyone that's here. But that collaborative piece, our work is deeply collaborative as teaching artists, deeply collaborative. So yeah, you're right, Marlon. Each of those questions, and I'm thinking those questions, those itemization of breaking down that large entrepreneurial, is it expensive to do so? All of those little things are the things that people are worried about if they can do it and go that extra to the extra. And so that leads us to the extra mile. And that leads us into our next question, our third question. What are some of your favorite tools, strategies, mindsets, tools, and mindsets that you can share with attendees, panelists, that you use as an arts entrepreneur? Open your box of goodies and tell us about them.
I think the big one for me is recognizing, kind of segueing from what you were just talking about, recognizing when I'm the best person to be in the room. So we teach a lot of different things to a lot of different people in a lot of different ways, and I am rarely, if ever, the one actually doing the teaching these days, because I got tired of being in a space working and knowing that there's so many other people who could be doing it better. And so why am I not trying to engage those people? And I think it's hard as an artist and as a teacher to be critical in that way sometimes. But I think it's important. And then conversely, understanding what are the best rooms for me to be in, what groups, what age groups, what people am I the most effective engaging with?
And that's generous. You have to be generous spirited artist or art curator to be able to say, you know what, this person can do it better. Let me let go of the reins a little bit. Yes, thank you.
I'd like to jump in there and add to Jeremy's comments, because I met him through a grant project. And one of the things that I found really remarkable was his ability to create partnerships. And I think I went to you, Jeremy, and said, how the heck do you know these people? He brought in the puppeteer from Warhorse. He brought in these people. And he said, oh, we all went to school together. So, go back to those sources, go back to those connections. And people love working together. and you respect each other, and it lent such strength to the work that you were doing. And I think Jeremy, you don't take credit for that. You are a great partnership maker.
Yes. Janelle or Marlon? Megan?
I'll let anyone speak before I do, but I do have some favorite tools that I love to share in the hopes that they will be helpful to any of our participants and listeners. Okay, well, I'll go then. You guys are so sweet. No, truly. Who's ready? Is it Megan? Megan, are you unmuted? You wanted to say something.
I'll go. I was just gonna say, like, creating a schedule, and like I practice mindfulness to help me like stress and helps me like reach my goals, and also like reminding myself that my goals are valid and worth something. So those are the things.
It's excellent. If we don't have that mindset, if we don't allow ourselves that mindset, the rest won't work. Awesome. And mindfulness, is that a practice that you started is that a practice that you started recently, or has that always been a way that you approach yourself as a creative?
That I started recently. So I noticed I was a little stressed, and so I had to like meditate and just relax. Yeah.
Awesome. Janelle?
Honestly, to that point that Megan just brought up, feeling good and rewarding, again, it's everything's a balance. But here's my favorite tool for that I find that it both makes you feel good and it's probably really effective. And I say probably because the impact is sometimes it's hard to measure, but it's this. Really doing everything one can to keep your partners close, the people who help you succeed on your day to day, again, to that point of collaborating. So one specific tool that I love and that I believe in, and that I find almost therapeutic and important, right? That makes you feel good thing that one does is writing thank you notes. We had a campaign of when this COVID really hit us, and we all found ourselves quite troubled and scared, and unknown, right? What was ahead. We actually utilized our teaching artists, the people that are closest to what they do and the mission, to just take a moment and write 20 notes, but no, not an email, not let's sit down and really think about deeply of that moment and share that. And we send out, and it had a great impact for us. People remembered us, and it sparked in them this idea of wanting to stay with you, help you. And I think that's very entrepreneurial. It's ways of finding new ways to share your message so that you're not forgotten.
Thank you, Marlon.
I think my thing, and actually one of my current students reminded me of it, is like to do the ugly painting, right? So you do the work. It might not be exactly what you want. It might not be beautiful, right, in that kind of idealistic sense, but you're working through the challenge, right? You're allowing yourself to kind of explore, to figure it out. You're giving yourself enough grace to let it go when it's done, if it's not ideal. And then you have tomorrow to start again. And I think that there's so much pressure in this moment that it's super hard to do that, right? To just to make that ugly painting, to let it be there, to extend yourself grace, and not to think that every act that you do will lead you to the exact thing that you want to achieve. Like, we have to remember that it does take time, and it does take space, and you're going to mess up sometimes. COVID makes it a little bit more, I think, pressing, that we feel that we have to succeed and get things done, or make it, because there's just all of the stresses that are happening. But I think doing the ugly painting is important.
Just making sure you create, just making sure you sit at the piano, just making sure you're in the studio, just making sure you're on the court, you know, that you're not in the cheap seats whining, that you're
Mhm.
on the court and you're doing the thing, you're doing the dang thing.
Right. And like, you're writing the statement that might not come out right, but like you'll get it tomorrow. Or, you know, you're reaching out to people that you hope support you, and they may say no, but you know, then you try again the next day. Like, I think it applies to all of those spaces.
Yes, I love that ugly painting idea. I love the thank you notes too, Marlon. That's such a great idea. Mindfulness. So we're talking about the ways that we deal with our person as an artist, and mindfulness and gratitude. And we're talking about collaboration as a tool and a strategy. And we're talking about just getting yourself the discipline of doing the work every day without judgment or without it having an endpoint. Those are all important strategies and tools. And can anyone speak to being on social media? Have you used Facebook groups as a strategy to collect people, making your kind of your own personal town hall? Have you taken any courses differently than you would not have before, like going to Coursera? Or some of those things can be strategies and tools too. Can any of you speak to doing any of those things?
I can say I worked with a woman who I met somewhere, right out in the world, in the field, and she does she teaches organizations and artists how to use social media effectively. So I did one of her classes because I knew that I was not doing it the right way. I still don't have the energy to like maintain social media, but when I do, I know how to do it because of her.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. Social media can be such a good tool. Anyone else?
I guess I'm thinking kind of the flip side of social media during COVID. And it also goes to a question that somebody asked about taking care of yourself emotionally in isolation. Not We've been talking, I know Marlon and I specifically have been talking a lot about working with an organization. I really took advantage of COVID as a time to unplug, because I had to, was forced to. And rather than being on the couch every day, just watching TV, though that happened as well. I kind of embraced the fact that for a second I didn't have to worry about what everybody else was doing, because everyone else was doing the same thing. And I didn't have to worry about what everybody else was saying, what everybody else was writing, what everyone else was thinking. And for a second, I was completely let all of that go, and I didn't realize how much time and energy and brain space that actually took up. It's like memorizing your calendar, but when you start writing it down and you don't remember your calendar, you realize how much energy it takes to remember a date. So for me, backing off the connectivity has been great, and it's helped me deal with that isolation that we're going through right now. That it's okay to really just be focused on my community, the people in my town. I live in a very small town for the first time in my life, and it's really helped me appreciate that I went from living in a city of 15 million people to 30,000, and enjoying that, because I do feel alone sometimes, obviously, but I don't feel lonely because of that shift in thinking. That right now it being quieter is a blessing.
As a strategy, indeed. Yes. Anyone else?
I think definitely. I like the idea of going back in time, and there are a couple of things that I like to think about in terms of developing one's network. Right, it's very hard to network when you need when it's needed, and you start networking, then it's not really, it's very difficult. So I guess the lesson is that one should always be networking and cultivating these relationships. So that's when I think it's really important, when, and we all do to some extent, I believe. So going back to those early relationships, those people who have known you the longest, and make sure you start there with those connections, because that can really help you deal with the isolation, right? Just reaching out and to those early contacts, or the people who you immediately think about, and continue to do that. I think that's it, most important, especially now. It can be quite isolating for some individuals.
Yes, there's an African principle about networking, that it's really not about, you don't come to a body of people or an entity and says, what can you do for me? But it really is, this is what I have, and how can this help you? And with that mindset, if you are able to think about reaching out to people to see what you can offer of what you know how to do and give to help them, it's much better, so that when it's necessary, like the best time to prepare is not when you need someone else, but all along, if it's a mindset of relationship building and what can I give? Everyone needs support. So can I come to your events? Can I come in and be in your space? Can we have coffee? Can we have COVID wine on Zoom and like kind of just chat about how our lives are going and what's the next thing we're thinking about? Let me see your ugly painting. What are you using to write your thank you notes? All of those things help to in our humanity as artists, but also as a tool and a strategy. I think a lot of people do not know how to network, and thus when we saw COVID hit us, we had so many different ranges of emotions to kind of recover from. So yes.
I don't know if you saw on the chat, Penny DePass put a great quote in: your net worth equals your network.
Yes.
Which is kind of a good slogan to get you through these times. Reach out to others.
Yes, for sure. So I want to go back to a little question that we kind of came up with earlier speaking yesterday, and Jeremy gave us this to think about, and the social and emotional management of your artist self when working in isolation and not in conjunction with an organization. How much of what we do we haven't had to do because we've depended on the organization that we were working with? And what about the way that you are working with any given organization, or the way that if you're an organization that reaches out to teaching artists, what's going to change? As we think about what we're going to do when we go forward, there will be an end to this. COVID won't last forever, right? So we've been talking about strategies for COVID, but what about in our regular time? Challenging on many levels, but what are we learning about ourselves that we can use going forward in entrepreneurial thinking, based on, like, it's kind of like when you move out of your parents' house, right? It's like when you finish college and you finished your last degree. No, you can't go back and get any more degrees. And you're really in the world as a working artist. Like, what now? Like, if I had to add to be entrepreneurial or die, and what now? So what are some of the things? And we've kind of played around those, but let's dig in a little bit more. We have a little bit more time as we gather. Those of us on my team here, we're going to gather up all the questions in a chat and just come back for answering the questions. But panelists, what about that? What do you think about that? What's next?
I really think that it'll be important that teaching artists find ways to do what they do, but in a different way. I'll give you an example. When I was a performer, that was my life. All I did was rehearse to get on stage and perform, and that's how I made my living. And during the downtimes, I never expected my company at that point, my dance company, to give me the work, the other work, to invent the work for me. So I really promoted myself as a teacher, as a dance teacher, and I created something that was unique to me, something that mixed my Latino-ness with, exercise and dancing, and make it up fun and beat, sort of utilize those things I knew how to do well, and get my friends, my girlfriends to, hey, come take my class, and they were paying me, and it was a great help. And there I was, so right now, if I found myself, not really able to do my dancing right now, this is what I do. I invite people and let's do it outside at a park. Let's meet, come, let's wear our mask and make it eventful. We'll have little tiny gift bags for you. And it may not be my teaching artist material that I do day to day that I would, but I have to expand, right, in order to keep going. So I think that's what I can offer in terms of my own experience going through this.
Yes, thank you, Marlon.
I think it's particularly challenging too for visual artists, because it is such an individualistic practice. And how do you make those connections? How do you step outside of your studio and not only serve your work but serve yourself emotionally?
Marlon, let's see, someone here, Marlon is spot on. TAs need to do it differently. We have from Jim White, it's a great time to revisit Julia Cameron's The Artist's Way, a kind of 12-step program or honing your own creativity. Jim, I just pulled my Artist's Way out and put the dust off of it, and I've been using it every morning. Navigating COVID has been hard for me. Thank you for creating the platform for those of us who really need it. Someone's thanking us for this webinar.
I mean, I would say, if I would be totally honest, that I can't even see beyond COVID at this moment. It's just one of those days. And I think we have to put that out in the universe. And in one of my roles as a leader of an organization that supports artists, it's really, I think, difficult to think about what comes next when we're constantly trying to make sure that our artists are safe, that the community that we're working with is safe, if depending on where they are kind of in the country, whether we're following phase 1, 2, or 3 and what that means. And so for me today, it could be better tomorrow or different tomorrow, right? Which is all a part of COVID. It's this, I'm acutely aware of wanting to make sure that anyone that is involved in our organization is well and safe and able to be creative, but problem solving how to be creative if things should shift. And so it takes up a lot of energy. And I think a couple of months ago, a lot of folks were thinking, oh, well, it'll be done. And here we are. So just in full transparency, it's a tricky question to honestly ask, because you want to be optimistic, but I have to be pragmatic.
I hear you. I hear you on that one, Janelle. There was a week when I had to just stop teaching online. I'm doing my dissertation edits. I'm teaching full time. I have a big band record that's being promoted, so it's necessary to, and it's smart to say, You know what? No, I'm not happy-go-lucky today. Yeah, that is a strategy. That is a strategy.
I'm just thinking about Sharon's comment about being particularly tricky for visual artists um, because of the individual task that it is. So question, Janelle and Megan, for you both. Um, I've collaborated a lot with filmmakers, dancers, musicians, but rarely with visual artists. And something that my arts council in my county has asked me to think about, because a lot of the work they do is with visual artists. So I was wondering for the two of you, like one of the things in my mind, for example, is it interesting to, because we plan our seasons 2 years ahead of time. So we're getting ready. I'm looking at a piece called Tony Stone, which is about the first professional female baseball player who happened to be Black. And so one of the things I was talking with the Arts Council about is, would it be interesting to send a prompt to visual artists to have them create pieces just around women in sports? And that be something that they show at the same time that we're doing this piece 2 years from now. Is that kind of prompting, does it feel too gimmicky, too structured? Have you guys done anything like that before, Jonell or Megan?
I haven't done anything like that before. I don't think it sounds gimmicky. I don't think so. I think it sounds cool.
I would agree with Megan. It sounds cool. And there are tons of artists who have done collaborative projects around performances and ballets. And I think the challenge or the question is, I think it's a great opportunity. Is there space to have conversation with visual artists to kind of come up with the best solution, right, to the question? So does it morph from women in sports to a particular position about women in sports? Is this painters, or is there an opportunity for three-dimensional work? I think it's a great opportunity. I know that a lot of artists in practice are partnering across disciplines and using different material. And so I think it's a great compliment, and I would go for it.
I love that idea. I remember seeing that young lady from Philadelphia who was the only girl, and she was like this, just really doing her thing. So women in sports is something that pulls at the heartstrings of people. I think a lot of different collaborative projects are coming up for people because you're having to think in this fishbowl and differently because of COVID. I think that's a great idea. I'm looking over here at some more activity in the chat, and Cleaster Cotton is saying that they virtually attended the International Teaching Artists Conference in Korea, and a lot of collaborations were made with colleagues from across the globe. Penny DePaz shared with us the set designers and costume designers of visual artists. Cynthia Harrell, hey Cynthia, she's in our program. 3D artists like potters would love to work collaboratively. This conversation is getting a lot of good feedback from the people who are attending and listening to everyone. Before we,
I feel like I've been, oh, sorry. No, I feel like I've been seeing more and more work collaboratively between writers and visual artists and performing artists too, which I think that in a way the COVID climate has given us the space and time to do that and kind of break out of that normal pattern that we're in. It's very exciting work.
Yes. I think we should say be entrepreneurial or die. It's like be collaborative or die. It's almost. I think something that we haven't touched on as much is your ability to be, I don't want to say not shy, but your ability to come out of your comfort. To get to our very end, I've asked Megan to share her screen to show us her beautiful mural. Can we do that? We'd warned her ahead of time. So as she's pulling that up, Sharon, oh, there it is. So Megan, tell us a little bit about this project.
All right. So I work with an organization or a group. It's called Art Ain't Innocent. And we did murals about like the injustice with Black Lives Matter. And this piece has to do with like just the Black form. No gender, no like sexual orientation or anything, just like has to deal with like America's discomfort with Blackness in general. And to me, Blackness can mean many different things, just like otherness. So that's what the piece is about.
It's beautiful. Beautiful.
And where was this?
It was downtown near 9th Street Bakery.
Okay. And so now this is one of the pieces that will be where again? Please share with our audience.
In the North Carolina History Museum.
Awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you.
It's wonderful. I think that piece just makes you want to write about it or talk about it. There's so many ways that you could interact with your work. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Megan is the graduate of the North Carolina Central Teaching Artist Certificate Program, and she also worked with me at North Carolina Arts Council for the event, one of the teaching artists in the daytime workshops. So
I wonder if we could revisit one comment that happened earlier, because I think that it seems to be a reoccurring theme in all of the Teaching Artist Tuesdays. And that was, I think, Jeremy, you mentioned it, and Jonell, you talked on it as well, time management for artists. Because there is so much going on in terms of how many directions you can be pulled in, particularly while you're trying to learn new technologies and also learn more about your own artwork, your own production. So what kind of suggestions does this group have for artists trying to manage their time better?
I think a big thing is identifying the kind of space that you work in the most effectively. And that space could change depending on what you're working on, right? So if I'm writing a grant, I need to be in an enclosed, quiet place. But if I'm working on my art, I like to be around noise. So I'd much rather be sitting in a coffee shop or a cafe working on a script, let's say. And I always knew that about myself, and then COVID made it abundantly clear when I didn't have a choice. So I think identifying ideal spaces for yourself. And I know not everybody has access to every kind of space they wish they had access to. So what are the near approximations? And then I think for me too, it's important. It sounds like Lenora does this as well. The idea of multitasking, I think, is a myth. So really going, all right, I'm going to set aside this time to focus on this thing. With myself, I try not to say like, I'm going to spend 2 hours on this. I say, okay, today I'm going to do this. It will take as long as it takes, but know that that's what you're spending today on, or as much of the day on as you need to. I think we tend to glorify the multitasker, which is like a unicorn. And I think it's useful to give yourself permission to separate what your brain is working on.
Yeah.
Right.
I would like to add something, and I'll try to make it really succinct. And in terms of time management, I think that's a very important question, and especially for artists. when I was pursuing a certification as a project manager, and one of the top three things is that you look at your schedule, you look at your budget, and you look at the quality of your project. So I remember this is kind of technical for me. How will I assimilate this information? So of course, as a professional dancer, I just danced all the terms, and I would say initiating, planning, execute, right? That was my way of learning this, right? So I'm the only dancer in this room of software developers that need a PMP in order to advance at their Cisco organizations or such. So, but the reason why I put myself through that, it's because I recognized that as an artist, I wanted to be sort of creative and think outside, but I needed structure, I needed focus in order to do it. So here's one gem that I learned really early in my career. Ask, when is it due? That's your most important question to ask whenever anyone is proposing any project or idea to you. When is it due? And then work backwards to understand what you need to do to meet the deadline. Time management.
Great idea.
You know, I really love the book, The One Thing. I think is that the One Thing by Keller. You know, that you really can't multitask, and he kind of talks you through the research about it, and that you have to focus on doing like one thing. So I share that with Jeremy. Anyone else? Okay.
We have hit most of the questions that I have received. Are you seeing anything else on Facebook?
I see on Facebook there was someone who was Marcia Patterson said impact outcome that will yield data that will attract donors, investors, nonprofits. That was early in our conversation. And now someone here has said, I really like what Jeremy said about separating it from your mind in order to realize how much energy it really takes. How do you decide when a project needs to be stepped away from, say, due to time management, or when to see it through? That's a good question here.
That is an excellent question.
How do you decide when a project needs to be stepped away from, say, due to time management, or when to see it through as one of those ugly painting exercises?
When do you walk away? Wow.
So for me, when I was teaching studio classes, I would tell my students that there's a difference between being finished and being done. And done is an emotional state, right? I think if you're emotional about it, you haven't quite solved it or decided whether you need to walk away, right?
Wow.
And finished, there's clearly in your head and in your practice, you come to an end. And that's, I think, the point where you decide that I'm done, I'm not done, I'm finished because it's not working, or I've pursued it to its natural end and it is not where I need to be or what it needs to be, or I'm finished because I've executed it and this is exactly, or as close to exactly as what I wanted. But I think the emotional part is that space where we give up and we sometimes regret, and we just have to navigate that spot.
That is powerful. Wow.
It really is.
I'm going to munch on that. There was another question here. The Teaching Artist Certificate Program. Renee Holiday asked about it. And I could just briefly say, and I'll put in the chat the link that you can go to, but it's a 3-semester program. It's a certificate program for artists who would like to know how to prepare their craft and their skill to be in the teaching artist field. It's all online, and you can find out more of it at nccu.edu/teachingartist. But I'm going to put the link in there, and it's a wonderful program, I think. But it allows for teaching artists who want to and to talk about how to get it going. I'm laughing because we hear Marlon typing.
So sorry.
To
I thought I was
know
being
how to-
clever.
out of the field. Because one of the things that happened when I was in New York in between tours is someone said, oh, you can take this job. I have this, they referred me to something at Carnegie Hall Education Department. I was like, what's a teaching artist? I had not been taught in my pursuit as a musician that a teaching artist was a niche, that was a whole big field. I mean, look at the event that you had in Korea. At ITAC. It was sponsored by the teaching artists community in Seoul, Korea, but it's an international field. But you do need to know how to present your materials, how to talk about your work, how to identify what it means, not to replace a classroom teacher and not to, but to assist a classroom teacher, or to be in a hospital or a prison or arts and cultural center or museum. Is sometimes it's as subtle as knowing how to talk about if you're a dancer or visual artist, or as detailed as going into a setting and collaborating with an organization to do a residency or a set of presentations. So.
Can I add to that too? I think it's a fantastic program, and what a great way to network with other artists in different fields. We've mentioned Teaching Artists Collaborative. Anyway, that's a great group to connect with. I just put in the chat as well, the Teaching Artists Guild. If you have not searched them and connected with that organization, it's a great way to have a network and start reaching out to others in the field. And one tool that the Teaching Artists Guild has that's really amazing, there's a map of the state of North Carolina, and you can put yourself on that map and list the services or art that you produce and start making connections in that way, so that if people search, you pop up as being in the state of North Carolina and available. So there are tools out there for you. We've mentioned several of them in other Teaching Artists Tuesday sessions, so I hope you'll take advantage of them. And we are almost out of time. Do we have any final comments from any of our panelists? Insights, those brilliant things that come right at the end of a conversation?
I want to quickly say, if you beginning of this session, because we've been on for almost 90 minutes now, you can see this on the Facebook pages of both Teaching Artist Certificate Program from NCCU and North Carolina Arts Council.
Yes.
If I may, the only brilliant thing I can think of is to continue to find ways to share the resources that the North Carolina Arts Council is coming up with, and understanding where the relief funding support is out there for teaching artists. I don't know if we discussed in any detail with that, but I think it's important for teaching artists to continue to keep their ears to the ground regarding the relief funding that's coming down and helping the state.
Thanks, Marlon. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to connect to our Facebook page. All the grants that come out are promoted through the Facebook page as well as the web page. So be sure and do that for yourself. This has just been an amazing, deep, rich conversation, and I think we could go even further. And every time we feel like there's more to be said. So if you have comments, please take the post survey, and we will hope to see you in our next session, which is October 27th, Tuesday as well, always at 3 p.m. And the title for that one is Digital Integration for Virtual Experiences, Models for Transforming Your Online Work. So I think you will find really valuable information and some people that are doing it very well out in the field. Thank you so much to all our fabulous panelists. We so appreciate you taking the time to be with us and adding to the conversation. We have so much talent in the state of North Carolina. We are totally blessed. So we always appreciate all of our attendees and our panelists as well. So be sure to join us next time. Lenora, you got any last minute?
I just put the registration link in the chat that should go out to everyone to register for October 27th. So
Perfect.
yeah, I'm just tickled pink. Thank you so much to Jeremy, Janelle, Marlon, and I think you've been really thought provoking. Sharon, it's hey, we got another one in the can, and you can go through it.
Cha-ching.
My partner in crime. Thank you, Karen, who's online and helping us from North Carolina
Yes.
Arts Council. Thank you so much to Misha and all of the great team at NCCU. So stay tuned. We're working to serve the teaching artists in our state. So thank you for letting us do that.
You're all the best. Thanks. Bye-bye, everybody.